All right, we'll pick up where we left off last time and start the timer. Boom, we're rolling. As I mentioned, the North Carolina coast was created from millions of years of waves crashing together and depositing sand and creating an outer barrier. And this is just the sand that you see picked up. In other places, the sand is really high and creates a dangerous situation for ships. And for the 400 years that we have really known America to exist, there have been plenty of shipwrecks, and those shipwrecks still are there today. And this comes to the key point of when we're talking about challenges or barriers, and what those barriers do is they can prevent people, goods, and ideas from being spread into certain areas. They can isolate certain areas, and when you isolate a certain area, it develops differently. If you build a wall around a certain area physically, the people inside are going to develop differently than the people outside of that area. And that's what happens with North Carolina. Its history is completely affected by this outer barrier. It's strange to think that the history, hundreds of years of North Carolina, and the development of people and the ideas and thoughts and practices are not affected necessarily by the people. It's not necessarily affected by God. It's affected by this outer barrier that prevents, it's a barrier that prevents the movement of people, goods, and ideas. Creates lack of navigable ports or a lack of infrastructure. And if we look at North Carolina, so let's just take an example. So imagine you are a farmer in North Carolina. You get your goods, let's say it's corn or tobacco. You farm tobacco, you put all the tobacco on the back of your cart. This is 1600s, 1700s, and then you take it to the coast. Well, there's a problem, as you can see right here, in the way that North Carolina's coastline is structured. And that's because of millions of years of those ocean waves coming together, building up the sand underneath. Slowly piling up and piling up, that's created a barrier. So instead of just going to the coast and automatically immediately being on the coast, if you've been to Florida, you go to the coast, you're on the coast. You just go right there, boom, there's the ocean. You go to South Carolina, you drive to the coast, boom, you're on the ocean. Virginia, you drive your cart to the coast, boom, you're on the ocean. Not in North Carolina. You get to the coast and not quite there, my friend, because there's a little bit of a little sea before you get to the ocean, because there's an outer barrier that's the result of those ocean waves from the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic coming together over and over and over, building that sand up until you actually have a physical landmass that is an actual barrier. It's almost like a wall that surrounds North Carolina, that prevents people from getting in, that prevents ideas from getting in, that prevents goods from getting in. And when you don't get ideas, when you don't get people, when you don't get goods for hundreds of years, you don't advance. Or at least in comparison, the other states that have no barrier, that you get directly into Virginia, you get directly into South Carolina, those states advance, they rise, they grow. North Carolina is static, it's stagnant, it does not grow, it does not move because nothing is flowing in. So you got to get your ship, put your goods on another boat, then that gets you to the outside, and then you put your stuff on another boat, and that can sail it out, right? Just to rewind that. So you take the farm, you put your tobacco, and you're on the coast. Yeah, but you have to put it on a boat to get it out to this outer barrier. Then you unload it, and then you put it on another boat, and then you ship it out. That's a lot of steps. That's very difficult. That's very challenging. I don't know if I want to do that as a tobacco farmer in North Carolina. It seems like it's going to be tough to be a farmer. Whereas if you're in South Carolina and you decide to be a farmer, you take your tobacco or your cotton, you put it on the cart, you take it to the coast, you put it on a boat, and boom, you're done. What? That's less steps. Should I be a farmer in South Carolina or should I be a farmer in North Carolina? Duh. South Carolina. It's obvious. And so if you look at the history of South Carolina in the 1600s and the 1700s, that's where the agriculture is. That's where the farming is. That's where then the people, that's where the goods go. And you'll see South Carolina grows, Virginia grows, but North Carolina doesn't grow because of a geographical barrier. Again, this goes back to physical geography and human interaction and how they come together, and it changes the growth of people. A lot of times we think like people decide who we're going to be, and we make decisions about what life is going to be like and where advancement is going to happen and where we're going to build cities and what we're going to do. But that's not necessarily the case. People make decisions about the land and our growth based on the geographical features. I'm not going to live in the mountains because it's much more difficult. So guess what? A lot of people share that same idea, and there's not very many people that live in the mountains. Same thing with North Carolina. There was a barrier, and that barrier was enough to convince people, I'm going to South Carolina, I'm going to go to Virginia. And that's almost like if you're imagining a race between these three states, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, who's going to be the most advanced? Who's going to be the most powerful? Where are the most people going to be? Where are the most cities going to be? Where are the more of the jobs going to be? Where are you going to be able to buy more goods? So they're all in a race. And North Carolina has a disadvantage. It's like the other guys get to start ahead. North Carolina is almost like they're running with one leg because we've got to deal with this barrier. Again, also to add to that, not only does it add an inconvenience, again, of you got to go take it to the coast, get it on a boat, put it on another boat. But another problem, like we mentioned before, was, again, the millions of years of this sand or these waves crashing together has built up this barrier. So we see this barrier, but also in these spots, there are spots where the sand, or they're called shoals, those have built up as well. But they have not built up to the fact that you can see them. They have not built up completely that they're visible to the eye. So you're sailing your boat around, and then all of a sudden, boom, you hit one of these shoals, you crash, you wreck, your goods are gone, and you lose millions of dollars. And that's all throughout the North Carolina coast, and it still is that way today because the ocean currents are still crashing together, and we still have these shoals built up all over the place underneath the water so that you can't see them. Now we have sophisticated technology that helps us know where they are today, but hundreds of years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, they had no idea. They could only trust their eyeballs, and so it's very easy for ships to crash. And this is still into modern times. We have tons of crashes. And so if I'm shipping goods in and out, I don't want to risk shipping my goods to North Carolina. I would much rather go to Virginia or South Carolina. So that's where the goods are going to be. That's where the jobs are going to be. And North Carolina is going to completely miss out. And that's going to affect North Carolina's economy. That's going to affect the money in North Carolina. And simply, the fact is, up until about 1900s or the 20th century, North Carolina is far behind. We are kind of the old man. We don't grow. Also hurting North Carolina's development, as we mentioned in their challenges or barriers are navigable ports, right? You don't have any ports to sail in or out of in North Carolina, but the other was lack of infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we know what structure means, and infra means the infrastructure or the roads. And you can simply see right here, North Carolina does not have very many roads. If you want to buy and sell goods, you need to be able to ship those goods to other people. And if you do not have roads, you cannot ship goods. Again, we talked about the farmer and the difficulties he had taking his tobacco to the coast, putting on a boat, then putting on another boat. The other problem is, all right, well, what if I want to sell it to another state? That means I need to put my goods on the back of a cart and then ship it on a road to another place. If you do not have very many roads, if you do not have very many railroads, then you can't ship goods. You can't sell goods out. You can't sell goods in. That means you can't make money. That means no jobs. That means no opportunities. The economy shrinks. And if you're living in an area that doesn't have a lot of jobs, then you need to move to a place that has more jobs so the population of North Carolina doesn't grow. So not only can you not sell goods, not only can you not thrive or prosper, but also, if nothing's really happening in your state, it separates you from the rest of the country. Ideas don't come in. So not only is it goods are not going in and out, but ideas, beliefs, concepts. And that's really what leads to our advancement as an American society or as any society is new ideas, new novel concepts, new ways of looking at things. But if you are walled off from the rest of the world, you're not going to learn about those new ideas. It's hard for us to imagine today because we have access to the internet and we can learn everything and know about everything and use those ideas to help us advance and help us be successful. Now imagine no internet. And imagine literally no contact with other human beings because they cannot get to you. There are no telephones. The only way in the 1600s to spread an idea is to literally go and talk to someone or give them a book that spreads information or to give them a newspaper. And if I cannot get to you, I cannot give you information. If I cannot get to you by a road or if I cannot get to you through the ocean because there's an outer barrier, then less ideas are being spread to your state. So less thinking, less ideas, less advancement for that state. And the end result is that for a couple hundred years, North Carolina is not like even top 20 states. Like we look at, early on the 13 colonies, we're like number 12 because we don't have infrastructure. We don't have roads, we don't have railroads, and we do not have navigable ports. We are in the race of who's going to be the best state, we're almost dead last. And we are last for a long time. They're adding new states. They're adding Ohio. They're adding Kentucky. But Ohio and Kentucky are creating roads. So they start those states. They're newer than us. We had already had a head start. Right? We were a state since the early 1600s. We were a colony. We had a head start. And Ohio and Kentucky and these Northwest ordinance states are flying by because they have roads. They have infrastructure. They don't have the issues that North Carolina has because of our lack of infrastructure and that coastal barrier, which we love today, which is a very great tourist spot today and benefits the economy. But in terms of business and production, it definitely held back North Carolina's growth. So again, we're talking about the challenges and the barriers. And there it is. It's that coastal barrier that has prevented it. And so if you go back in time, Virginia grows because they have navigable ports. That means you can navigate them. You're not going to run into a shoal that built up under the ground. You don't have to deal with an outer barrier. You go to South Carolina, and if you look at the 1600s, if you look at the 1700s, Virginia and South Carolina are more prosperous. And they're still very strong states with very strong economies, here on the coast of South Carolina. Savannah is a very successful city. Newport, Virginia, Virginia Beach, these coastal cities are still strong and thriving and great economic places to sell goods, buy goods. There's universities, there's plenty of business, and they benefit from not having barriers. Whereas North Carolina, we have a tourist economy out here, but we do not have advanced machinery. We do not have factories. We do not do a lot of production and selling across the world on the North Carolina coast because it's prohibitive. It's expensive to do business on the coast because of this outer, very great touristy place. But in terms of business and creating jobs, Virginia and South Carolina are the place to go. Lack of roads, I've already talked about that. Again, not very many roads in North Carolina. And unfortunately, that's the job of the government. Some governments, like I said before, Kentucky and Ohio and these northwestern states, they're proactive. They spent taxpayers' money and they realized we need roads, we need canals. That will increase business. And if you can ship goods, you can sell goods, you can buy goods, it's going to increase the flow of people, the flow of ideas, and we will become more advanced. And you'll see states like Ohio and and Kentucky, which will grow, and North Carolina will pretty much remain stagnant and not grow. You don't have roads, you don't have factories, you don't have shops, your economy does not grow, and you're going to see people who actually will move from North Carolina up into these states. My ancestors were in North Carolina in the 1600s, and ain't nothing happening in North Carolina in the 1600s and the 1700s. And so they realized the place to be is Ohio, and they move to places that are growing and that are advancing. North Carolina is known as the Rip Van Winkle state. It's the story about this guy who falls asleep for 60 years and then wakes up and then doesn't recognize anything. And that's kind of like North Carolina. While the rest of the country is developing because of roads, because of infrastructure, because of canals, because of rivers, because of navigable portways, North Carolina doesn't change. So like 60 years pass by. Ohio is a new state. They're growing. Kentucky's growing. And then there's old North Carolina up to the same old tricks. Nothing has changed. It's literally like we were trapped in time. That's why North Carolina is referred to the Rip Van Winkle state for hundreds of years. Ain't nothing happening in North Carolina while everyone else is becoming advanced and changing. Now that will change in the 20th century, but that's pretty amazing. The first 300 years of American history in North Carolina is just there, frozen in time. Like we're frozen like Han Solo in the Carbonite. Probably don't understand that reference. Minute 38. Let's see how much further we can go. So roads, infrastructure, it's a big deal. It's still a big deal today. Physical landscape of a place may limit mobility. It's pretty obvious. Mountains are going to trap people in. They're going to keep people from moving in. And so sometimes when you have mountain communities, people are isolated. They have different ideas, different beliefs, not a lot of business, not a lot of people moving into those areas. I mean, it's just common sense. Physical landscape will limit your mobility. There are places where it's going to be hard to live because it's impossible to get there. No one lives in the desert. There are a couple people, but not a lot of people. A lot of people lived on the coast. You know why? Because it was really easy to sail a boat into these areas. This is the opposite. So physical landscape may limit the mobility. Well, there are no limits here, but there actually is one here because this physical landscape limited the mobility to get to North Carolina, whereas it's easier to get to these other states, and so they grow. Now you look at this Appalachian area, there was a low population here because the Appalachian Mountains limited the mobility of people. Now it says may because over the course of time, eventually people can say, well, if no one else wants that land, I'll take that land. Forests also, you got to chop down all these forests, the Outer Banks, those are all examples. So physical landscape, these are basic ideas that we study in geography. We can study this from all around the world. It still consists today. We can see places around the world where there are difficulties created by landscape that are still keeping people out. Still, there are deserts where people aren't living. There are mountaintops where, you know what, I'm not going to go live up here on the top of the mountain. I don't think I should build a house up here. If I am lucky enough to survive and climb my way up there, how am I going to get food? How am I going to get water? How am I going to survive day in, day out up here? We're going to climb all the way down every single day. Physical landscape is going to place limits of mobility on people. It's going to limit the spread of ideas. It just basically, the earth tells us where we can and cannot live.